The night before Daddy and I started our through hike of the Arizona Trail, the internet troll fairy left a little gift under my pillow from a Canadian named Kieran.
Hi. Just because you have had a turbulent past, clearly, and sexualized spanking, does not mean everyone sexualizes spanking. Some people sexualize feet, but does that make all feet a sexual entity? Nope. Grow up.
I've been wanting to address this topic for years now, but I wasn't sure how to bring it up. So thank you, Kieran. You've given me the opportunity I've been looking for. Snark is our bread and butter here on youtube.com, but I actually respect this question. It makes sense to me. I can totally understand why a smart, thoughtful person, and to be clear, I'm not accusing Kieran of being smart or thoughtful, would wonder about this kind of thing. I've spent a lot of time writing things like, children have emerging sexual identities, and if even 1% of them perceive spanking as a sex act, we are sexually violating too many kids. That was true when I wrote it, and it's still true. But does that logic carry over to other things? Wait a minute. If it's true that paraphilias are innate, unchosen, and lifelong, that would mean that any paraphilia could emerge during childhood, like a shoe fetish. So by her own logic, this is basically saying that parents shouldn't be allowed to put shoes on their kids. Is that what I'm saying? Like I said before, I really do respect this question. It's logical, and I even think it's good faith. So I'll give a good faith question a good faith answer. I do believe that spanking children, or as I prefer to call it, state-sanctioned child battery, is sexual abuse, regardless of parental intent. But no, I don't believe that putting shoes on a kid is also sexual abuse. And the reason why is the topic of this video. How is butt stuff different than other stuff? I'm so glad you asked. I'll give you a hint. It's not a consent thing. In fact, in conversations about children's rights, I really do think it's smart to avoid the word consent completely. The question of when and how the consent rights of children should be respected is just too big and way too interesting for a YouTube response to a Facebook troll. Like, kids don't consent to being spanked, but a lot of the time they don't consent to wearing shoes either. Babies can't, and presumably don't, consent to getting stabbed with needles, but I'm in favor of vaccinating kids. And I'm in favor of putting shoes on them because I support violating a child's consent for reasons that are supported by science, health-preserving, and rare. And I bet most of you do too. So let's not try to pretend that children's rights can be reduced to a consent binary, because they can't. And trying to pretend they can only derails these conversations before they even begin. So this isn't a conversation about consent. It's also not a conversation about personal preference, even though Kieran tried to reduce it to one when he said that I regard spanking as sexual, but not everyone does. That's definitely true, but it's also totally irrelevant. The category of what at least some people find sexual is just too broad to be useful. There are like 7.8 billion people on Earth, so that means there are like 7.8 billion different personal experiences of sexuality. Everything and anything can be sexual to someone out there. My point is, it's not useful to focus on our personal preferences or feelings, because that rubric both includes and excludes absolutely everything. So the question, what is sexual to me, an individual, is not useful. But I think two other questions are useful for illustrating why butt stuff is different than other stuff. What is sexual to our culture? And what is sexual to our bodies? In other words, a personal perspective is not useful here, but a cultural and physiological one is. Butts are a sexual body part in our culture. And when I say our culture, I basically mean human culture, since butts have been regarded as erogenous zones in cultures around the world for millennia. Even if you don't personally have sexual feelings about your butt or about butts in general, even if you want to argue that spankings have a cultural connotation that is more disciplinary than sexual, your personal feelings don't change the overall place that butts hold in our cultural landscape. Sometimes people try to convince me that a child's butt can never be sexual because it's on a child. To that, I want to ask you, how would you feel if you walked into a classroom and saw a teacher touching a child's shoulder or tying a child's shoe. Now, how would you feel if you found that same teacher touching a child's butt? I bet one of these scenarios was a lot more alarming to you than the others, because butts are a sexual body part. Actually, what I really want to say to people who try to pretend that butts aren't sexual is, oh, butts aren't sexual? Great, prove it to me by sending a selfie of your ass to the office group chat. Thanks! Not all body parts are created equal. Boobs, butts, and genitals have a sexual cultural connotation that other body parts just don't. There's also a significant physiological difference. But you know what? This random article I just happened to find here on internet.com sums it up pretty well. So I'll just quote this and leave a link in the description. Butts aren't just culturally sexualized. They're biologically sexual too. Nerve tracts that pass through the lower spine carry sensory information to and from both the butt and genitals. Some scientists speculate that these nerves can stimulate one region when the other is provoked. There's also a blood vessel in the pelvic region called the common iliac artery. When blood rushes to a child's butt, because, say, you're spanking him, blood rushes down that artery, but the artery splits. Some of it directs blood to the genitals. So when you cause blood to rush to a child's butt, you're also causing it to rush to his or her other sex organs. The other time this kind of genital blood engorgement happens is during erection or arousal. The bottom line is that butts are sexual in cultural and physiological ways that other body parts, including oft fetishized body parts such as feet, just aren't. About a year ago, I had a really interesting conversation about exactly this topic with my friend Emma. Some of you might remember Emma. I interviewed her for this channel about her tickling fetish. Tickling has always been a profoundly sexual act for Emma, so she has understandably strong feelings about the ethics of tickling kids. And she's not the only person who feels this way. In 2020, Jenny Marder wrote an op-ed about exactly this for the New York Times. The case against tickling is a strong one. Lawrence Cohen, PhD, author of the book Playful Parenting, said that tickling can overwhelm the nervous system and make children feel helpless and out of control. The reflexive laughter can disguise discomfort and even pain. It's also a clear boundary breaker. When we tickle children without their buy-in, we're teaching them that it's okay to be touched and to touch others in ways that they don't like. I agree with all of that. Being conscious of a child's boundaries and physical autonomy is a good thing. When I tickle my nephews, which I do sometimes, I make a conscious effort to stop if they say stop, and I also try to throw in some regular check-in questions like, is this fun, or would it be more fun to play a different game? Things like that. I do that because I recognize that tickling could easily cross the line into a physical consent violation, and I love my nephews, so I don't want to do that. But I do not, at present, want to criminalize non-consensual tickling, but I do want to criminalize non-consensual spanking. Part of this is just a desire for legal consistency. In the United States, our laws mostly agree that it's sexual battery to non-consensually spank an adult. And I just don't think sexual battery stops being sexual battery when your victim is your child. But the distinction also boils down to body parts. Emma's armpits are an extremely sexual body part for her, personally, but they're not sexual to most of the world. Kieran was right when he said that butts aren't as sexual to everyone else as they are to spanking fetishists, but that ignores the undeniably sexual place butts occupy in our world. No one would blink if Emma decided to walk down the street in a sleeveless dress, but I bet they'd frickin' blink if I tried to walk down the street in assless chaps. Butts are culturally, socially, and physiologically sexual, and that's why hitting a kid on that body part is not the same thing as putting shoes on a kid's feet. Kieran wrote, some people sexualize feet, but does that make all feet a sexual entity? Nope. And he's right. The fact that some people sexualize a thing does not make that thing unavoidably or universally sexual. But the fact that cultural and biological reality sexualize butts does make butts and butt stuff unavoidably sexual. But like, I've been having these conversations for almost a decade now, and I've heard from a lot of people who felt sexually traumatized by childhood spankings. So when I try to warn parents about that risk, I know I'm talking about something real. I've never heard from a shoe or foot fetishist who felt sexually violated by, like, childhood trips to Payless, but I'm not ruling out the possibility that there's a real risk here that I'm currently unaware of. So if I'm missing something, if, for instance, you think I'm way off base for not wanting to criminalize non-consensual tickling, or if you think I'm wrong to regard putting shoes on a child as a low-risk activity, I want to hear your thoughts. Please slide into my email inbox and tell me what's on your mind. Not you, Kieran.